The crimson sky of Zirian 7 burned with dying light as Zarathal pressed her trembling form against the jagged rocks of the canyon wall. Her elongated limbs, graceful despite their alien appearance, shook with exhaustion and terror. The Velnari female clutched at empty air where her infant should have been, her forearms moving in desperate, searching motions. Her large, opalescent eyes leaked the silver tears of her species as the sound of pursuit grew closer. The war had come to Zirian 7 without warning. The hegemony forces, those brutal conquerors who swept across the galaxy like a plague, had descended upon her peaceful colony world with devastating efficiency. Zarathal had been tending to her garden when the first explosions rocked the settlement. The bioluminescent flowers she cultivated with such care were instantly vaporized by plasma fire, their gentle glow replaced by the harsh glare of destruction. She had run then, clutching her precious infant Kethmore to her chest. The baby's soft blue skin and tiny tendrils had been warm against her as they fled through the burning streets of New Velnara. Other families ran alongside them, their cries of anguish mixing with the roar of enemy aircraft overhead. Children called for parents who would never answer again. Elders stumbled and fell, their bodies too frail to keep pace with the desperate flight. The evacuation ships had been their only hope. Massive vessels designed to carry thousands off-world in case of emergency, they represented salvation for the colony's survivors. Zarathal had pushed through the panicking crowds at the spaceport, her baby pressed close as civilians fought to board the departing craft. The hegemony's attack ships streaked overhead like mechanical vultures, their weapons turning the landing platforms into fields of molten metal. That's when the unthinkable happened. A direct hit from a hegemony destroyer had struck the evacuation ship just as Zarathal reached the boarding ramp. The explosion threw her backward through the air, her body tumbling across the burning tarmac. When the ringing in her head cleared and she could see again, the ship was gone. Completely vaporized. And, somewhere in that chaos, in that moment of terror and confusion, little Kethmore had been torn from her arms. Now, hours later, she hid in the barren wastelands outside the colony. The hegemony ground forces methodically searched the ruins, their mechanical footsteps echoing off the canyon walls. They showed no mercy to survivors. Their standing orders were clear: total extermination of all Velnari colonists. The species had committed the crime of refusing to submit to hegemony rule, choosing instead to maintain their peaceful independence. Such defiance could not be tolerated. Zarathal pressed herself deeper into the rock crevice as another patrol passed nearby. The soldiers were Crothari, a brutish race that served as the hegemony's shock troops. Their thick, armored hides gleamed dully in the fading light, and their tusked faces showed no emotion as they scanned for survivors. Behind them walked a hegemony officer, his pale skin marked with the ritual scars of his rank. He spoke into a communication device with cold efficiency. Sector 7 cleared. No survivors detected. Moving to Sector 8. The words hit Zarathal like physical blows. No survivors. Her people were gone. Her friends, her neighbors, her family, all dead. And, somewhere in this nightmare, her infant son was either dead too or worse, captured by these monsters. The hegemony had a particular hatred for Velnari children, seeing their natural psychic abilities as a threat to their empire's order. As the patrol moved on, Zarathal allowed herself to weep. The silver tears flowed freely down her face as grief overwhelmed her. She had failed as a mother. Failed to protect the most precious thing in her life. Kethmore had been barely 6 months old, his tiny mind just beginning to develop the telepathic gifts of their species. He would have grown to be a healer, like his grandmother. Instead, he was gone. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze. Heavy boots crunched on the rocky ground, but the gait was different from the mechanical precision of the hegemony forces. These steps seemed more organic. More natural. Zarathal peered carefully around the edge of her hiding place and gasped. A figure approached through the twilight, moving with purpose but also caution. It was clearly not hegemony, the armor was different, more functional than ceremonial. The being walked upright on 2 legs like a Velnari, but the proportions were all wrong. Too short, too broad through the chest. As it drew closer, she could see pale skin where the armor didn't cover, and hair that caught the dying light. A human. Zarathal had heard stories of the humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had, by now. They were the newcomers, the strange bipeds from a world called Earth who had burst onto the galactic scene less than 50 years ago. The stories about them varied wildly depending on who told them. Some said they were savage warriors who knew only violence. Others claimed they were surprisingly gentle, showing kindness even to their enemies. Most agreed on one thing: they were utterly unpredictable. The human was alone, which was odd. Their species rarely operated solo according to the reports Zarathal had read. They were pack creatures, social beings who formed strong bonds with their own kind. Yet here one walked through a war zone by himself, seemingly unafraid of the hegemony forces that controlled the area. As the figure drew nearer, Zarathal could see more details. The human was male, with short dark hair and skin weathered by sun and wind. His armor bore no insignia she recognized, but it was clearly military grade. Advanced, even by galactic standards. A rifle hung across his back, and various tools and weapons were clipped to his belt. But what caught her attention wasn't his equipment. It was what he carried in his arms. Zarathal's breath caught in her throat. Cradled against the human's chest, wrapped in what looked like emergency blanket material, was a small form. Too small to be anything but an infant. The bundle moved slightly, and she caught a glimpse of blue skin. Her heart stopped. Kethmore, she whispered, the name barely a breath on the wind. The human's head snapped up at the sound. His eyes, a strange pale blue unlike any Velnari's, scanned the rocks until they found her hiding spot. For a moment, they stared at each other across the small distance. Zarathal saw no hostility in his gaze, but she also saw no fear. This was a being who had seen combat and survived. Who had made hard decisions and lived with the consequences. Slowly, carefully, the human approached her hiding place. He moved with deliberate, non-threatening gestures, keeping his weapons holstered. When he was close enough to speak without shouting, he stopped and addressed her in accented but understandable Velnari. "Your child," he asked simply, indicating the bundle in his arms. Zarathal emerged from her hiding place like a creature emerging from a dream. Her legs shook as she stood, her eyes fixed on the small form the human carried. Is he alive?" she managed to ask, her voice breaking with hope and terror. The human's expression softened slightly. "Alive. Scared, but unharmed. Found him in the wreckage of the evacuation ship about 2 hours ago. Been looking for survivors ever since." The words hit her like a physical force. Alive. Her baby was alive. Zarathal took a stumbling step forward, then another, until she was close enough to see clearly. There, wrapped in the human's improvised blanket, was Kethmore. His tiny face was scrunched up in sleep, his small tendrils moving slowly as he dreamed. He looked exactly as she remembered from those terrifying moments of separation. "How?" she breathed. "The explosion, the ship was destroyed." The human nodded grimly. "Most of it was. Found him in a section that broke away during the blast. Must have been thrown clear. Guess someone up there likes him." He paused, studying her face. "You're injured." Zarathal looked down at herself for the first time in hours. Her clothing was torn and scorched from the explosion. Blue blood seeped from several cuts along her arms and torso. She had been so focused on finding her son that she had ignored her own pain. "It's nothing," she said, reaching out toward her child. The human didn't immediately hand over the infant. Instead, he studied her with those pale eyes, as if making some kind of assessment. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question surprised her. What does it matter? Please, give me my son." "Matters because you're in shock and you've lost blood. Can't take care of a baby if you collapse." The human reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out what looked like a nutrition bar. "Eat this first. Then, we'll talk." Zarathal stared at him in disbelief. Here was a member of a species known for their warrior culture, standing in the middle of a war zone, refusing to return her child until she took care of herself. It was so absurd it was almost comical. You can't be serious. The human's expression remained unchanged. Dead serious. Eat? Something in his tone brooked no argument. With shaking hands, Zarathul took the nutrition bar and bit into it. It tasted like chemicals and artificial flavoring, but her stomach immediately responded with desperate hunger. She hadn't realized how famished she was until that moment. The human watched approvingly as she devoured the bar. Better, he said when she finished. Now, let's get somewhere safer before we do this reunion. Hegemony patrols come through here every 30 minutes. He was right, of course. They were exposed here in the open canyon. But Zarathul couldn't bear the thought of her son being carried away again, even by someone who had saved him. Please, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Let me hold him. Just for a moment. The human studied her face again, then carefully transferred the sleeping infant into her waiting arms. The moment Kethmore's weight settled against her chest, Zarathul felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. He was real. He was warm and breathing and alive. Her lower arms instinctively wrapped around him while her upper hands gently stroked his tiny head. Kethmore stirred at his mother's touch, his large eyes opening to focus on her face. He made a soft cooing sound that was pure music to her ears. Through their species' natural telepathic bond, she felt his emotions, confusion, lingering fear, but also recognition and comfort. He knew her. He remembered her scent, her touch, the sound of her heartbeat. Thank you, she whispered to the human, tears streaming down her face again. But these were tears of joy, not grief. Thank you for bringing him back to me. The human nodded simply. Got kids of my own back home, he said quietly. Know what it's like to worry about them. He shouldered his rifle and scanned the surrounding area. We need to move. There's a cave system about half a click from here. Should be safe until I can figure out how to get you off this rock. Zarathul looked up from her son's face. You're helping us escape? That's the plan. But why? Your species has no alliance with mine. No obligation to help Velnari refugees. The human was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft but firm. Don't need an alliance to do what's right. Kid deserves a chance to grow up. You deserve a chance to raise him. He met her gaze directly. Besides, can't stand bullies. Never could. Something in his tone suggested there was more to it than simple altruism, but Zarathul didn't press. Whatever his reasons, this human had saved her son and was offering to help them escape. In a galaxy where her species had few friends, that was more than she had dared to hope for. What's your name? She asked as they began to make their way toward the caves he had mentioned. Marcus, the human replied, checking his scanner for patrol movements. Marcus Chen. And you? Zarathul. And this is Kethmore. She adjusted her grip on the baby, making sure he was secure as they moved over the rough terrain. Marcus nodded approvingly. Nice names. Strong names. He paused at the mouth of the canyon, listening for sounds of pursuit. Zarathul, I need you to know something before we go any further. The hegemony has declared this world completely sterilized. They think everyone's dead. That gives us an advantage, but it also means there's no official rescue coming. The implications of his words sank in slowly. Then, how do we escape? Marcus smiled then, and, for the first time, Zarathul saw something dangerous in his expression. Something that reminded her why humans had earned their reputation as formidable warriors. Leave that to me. I've got friends who specialize in impossible rescues. Just need to get word to them. As they made their way through the growing darkness toward the cave system, Zarathul found herself studying the human who had saved her son. Marcus moved with the fluid grace of a predator, constantly alert but never seeming tense. He checked his scanner regularly, adjusted their route to avoid patrol areas, and somehow managed to keep up a steady pace while making almost no noise. More puzzling was his gentle treatment of her and Kethmore. Every few minutes, he would glance back to make sure she was keeping up. When she stumbled on loose rocks, he was immediately there to steady her. When Kethmore began to fuss, Marcus produced a small device that played soft, soothing tones until the baby calmed. "You said you have children," Zarathal said during one of their brief rest stops. "How many?" Marcus's expression softened. "Two. A daughter and a son. Emma's 8 now, and Jake just turned 5. He pulled out a small holographic projector and showed her images of 2 young humans with bright smiles and their father's pale eyes. "Haven't seen them in 6 months. This deployment was supposed to be routine patrol duty." "They're beautiful," Zarathal said, meaning it. There was something appealing about human children, with their round faces and curious expressions. "Your mate must miss you terribly." Marcus's face darkened slightly. "Lost my wife 2 years ago. Cancer. It's just me and the kids now, with help from my parents." He put away the projector and stood. "That's why I understand what you're going through. Can't imagine losing one of them." They continued in comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Zarathal found herself warming to this strange human who carried pictures of his children into combat zones and risked his life to save alien babies. Everything she had heard about his species suggested they were aggressive, territorial, and violent. Marcus certainly looked like he could be all of those things when necessary. But, here, now, he was showing a gentleness that contradicted every stereotype. The cave Marcus led them to was well hidden, its entrance concealed by an overhanging rock formation. Inside, it opened into a spacious chamber with multiple passages leading deeper into the rock. Marcus activated a small light source and began setting up a temporary camp. "This should do for tonight," he said, unpacking supplies from his considerable pack. Water purification tablets, more food, medical supplies. "We can patch up your wounds properly now." As Marcus worked, Zarathal settled against the cave wall with Kethmore. Her son had awakened and was looking around with the wide-eyed curiosity typical of Velnari infants. His small tendrils waved gently in the air, sensing the emotional resonance of the cave. Unlike adult Velnari, babies couldn't control their telepathic abilities, so they absorbed emotions from their surroundings like sponges. "He's picking up your feelings," Zarathal explained when she noticed Marcus watching the baby with interest. "Velnari children are naturally empathic. He can sense that you mean no harm." Marcus knelt beside them, studying Kethmore with genuine curiosity. "That's amazing. How developed will it get?" "By adulthood, he'll be able to sense emotions clearly within about 10 meters. Some develop stronger abilities. Healers can actually influence emotional states to promote physical healing. Others become counselors or mediators." She smiled down at her son. "I hoped he might follow his grandmother's path as a healer." "Still might," Marcus said firmly. "War doesn't last forever." That night, as Kethmore slept peacefully in his mother's arms and Marcus kept watch by the cave entrance, Zarathal found herself thinking about the human's words. War doesn't last forever. For her people, it felt like it had lasted their entire existence. First the hegemony's expansion, then the desperate flight from world to world, seeking someplace safe to rebuild their civilization. But, looking at Marcus, silhouetted against the starlight at the cave mouth, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. This human soldier, this stranger from a species her people barely knew, had risked everything to save her child. If there were others like him in the galaxy, perhaps the future wasn't as dark as it seemed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The hegemony would continue their patrols, and eventually they would have to attempt the dangerous journey off-world. But tonight, for the first time since the attack began, Zarathal allowed herself to believe that her son might actually have a future. Outside the cave, the stars of Zirian 7's system wheeled slowly overhead, indifferent to the small drama playing out on the planet's surface. In the distance, the lights of hegemony search teams continued their methodical sweep of the ruins. But, here, in this small pocket of safety, a Velnari mother held her rescued child while a human warrior stood guard against the darkness. And, in that moment, the galaxy seemed just a little less hostile than it had before. Dawn came slowly to Zirian 7, the planet's twin suns casting long shadows across the devastated landscape. Zarathul awakened to the sound of gentle humming, a melody she didn't recognize but found oddly comforting. Opening her eyes, she saw Marcus sitting near the cave entrance, methodically cleaning his rifle while keeping watch. The humming stopped when he noticed she was awake. "Morning," he said quietly, not wanting to wake Kethmore, who still slept peacefully in her arms. "How are you feeling?" Zarathul took inventory of her body. The cuts and burns from the previous day's explosion still ached, but Marcus had treated them with some kind of advanced medical gel during the night. The wounds were already beginning to heal, showing none of the infection she had feared. "Better," she admitted. "What was that song you were humming?" Marcus looked slightly embarrassed. "Old Earth lullaby my grandmother used to sing. Brahms' lullaby, it's called. Always helps me think clearly." He shouldered his rifle and pulled out his scanner. "We've got a problem, though. Hegemony's changed their search pattern. They're being more thorough today." As if to emphasize his point, the distant sound of aircraft could be heard echoing off the canyon walls. Marcus frowned at his scanner's display. 3 patrol craft, flying in overlapping search grids. They're not just looking for survivors anymore. They're looking for something specific. Zarathul felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "They know we're here?" "Not exactly, but they know someone survived yesterday's sweep. Found tracks near the evacuation site." Marcus packed up their meager camp with efficient movements. "We need to move deeper into the cave system. I've been studying the geological scans. There's a network of tunnels that leads to an old mining complex about 20 kilometers from here." 20 kilometers? Zarathul looked down at Kethmore, who was beginning to stir in her arms. "With a baby?" Marcus's expression was grim but determined. "It's our best shot. The mining complex has industrial-grade communication equipment. If I can get a message to my people, we can arrange an extraction." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I won't lie to you, Zarathul. It's going to be dangerous. But staying here means certain death once they bring in thermal scanners." The baby chose that moment to wake fully, his large eyes blinking as he adjusted to consciousness. Immediately, his small face scrunched up and he began to cry, a thin, keening sound that echoed off the cave walls. Zarathul quickly began the soothing motions that came naturally to Velnari mothers, but Kethmore's cries only grew louder. "He's hungry," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "I need to feed him, but the stress. I don't know if I can." Marcus was beside her in an instant, pulling a small container from his pack. "Emergency formula," he explained. "Designed for multi-species use. The medics made me carry it after we rescued those Altarian refugees last year." His hands were surprisingly gentle as he prepared the feeding mixture, testing the temperature carefully before handing it to her. Kethmore took to the artificial nutrition reluctantly, but his cries subsided as his hunger was satisfied. Marcus watched the process with the easy familiarity of someone who had fed babies before, occasionally offering quiet suggestions about positioning and pace. "You're very good with children," Zarathul observed as her son settled into a contented feeding rhythm. "Had plenty of practice. Emma went through a phase where she'd only eat if I sang to her. Drove my wife crazy." Marcus smiled at the memory, but there was sadness in it too. "Sarah used to joke that I was better with babies than she was. Said I had the patience for it." "Tell me about her," Zarathul said softly. "Your wife." Marcus was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant with memory. "Sarah was a doctor. Pediatric oncologist. Spent her days saving kids with cancer, came home exhausted but always had energy for Emma and Jake." He adjusted his grip on his rifle, checking the ammunition count automatically. "She was diagnosed with the same disease she'd been fighting in others. Irony of the universe, I guess. I'm sorry." "Yeah. Me too." Marcus stood abruptly, shouldering his pack. "She would have liked you, though. Would have respected what you're doing for Kethmore. Sarah always said mothers were the real warriors, they fight battles nobody else can see. The compliment struck Zarathal unexpectedly. In Valnari culture, mothers were revered, but it was rare to hear such sentiment from an alien species. Human females don't raise their young? They do, but human society is complicated. We share responsibilities more than most species, from what I understand. But, when it comes to protecting kids, human mothers are absolutely fierce. Had a sergeant once who was a single mom. Toughest soldier I ever served with, but she'd go completely feral if anyone threatened her daughter. As Marcus led them deeper into the cave system, Zarathal found herself thinking about the differences between their species. Valnari society was matriarchal by nature, with mothers holding most positions of authority and respect. Males were valued as partners and contributors, but the core family unit revolved around the mother-child bond. Humans, apparently, had developed something more balanced but equally protective. The cave tunnels were older than she had expected, carved from the living rock by some long-vanished mining operation. Marcus moved through them with confidence, consulting his scanner regularly to maintain their bearing. The passages were wide enough to walk upright, but the weight of all that stone above them made Zarathal claustrophobic. "How do you know where we're going?" she asked during one of their brief rest stops. Marcus tapped his scanner. "Military-grade geological survey data. We mapped this whole system before the hegemony arrived." Zirian 7 was supposed to be a potential mining world for the Terran Federation before we learned it was inhabited. He looked slightly embarrassed. "Standard policy now is to check for indigenous populations first. Learned that lesson the hard way." "Your people have made similar mistakes?" "More than we'd like to admit. Humans have a tendency to expand first and ask questions later. It's gotten us in trouble more than once." Marcus helped her navigate a particularly steep section of tunnel. "That's part of why I'm here, actually. The Federation has a new mandate about protecting non-combatant populations. When we detected the hegemony attack, my unit was dispatched to assist with evacuations." "But, you came alone." Marcus's expression darkened. "My unit was delayed. Political complications. By the time I got here, the attack was already underway. Command ordered me to observe and report, not engage." His jaw tightened. "I've never been good at following orders when kids are involved." Zarathal stopped walking. "You disobeyed direct orders to help us?" "Wouldn't be the first time." Marcus continued moving forward without breaking stride. "Won't be the last, either. Some things are more important than military protocol." The implications of what he was saying hit her slowly. This human soldier had violated his own chain of command to save her and Kethmore. When his superiors learned what he had done, there would almost certainly be consequences. Court-martial, imprisonment, or worse. Yet he spoke of it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What will happen to you when this is over?" "Depends on how it ends." Marcus didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "If we get you and the kid to safety, if I can document what the hegemony did here, maybe command will decide the intelligence was worth the insubordination." "If we don't?" He shrugged. "Guess it won't matter much then, . They walked in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Zarathal found herself studying the human who had risked everything for strangers. Marcus moved with the fluid efficiency of a professional soldier, but there was something else there too. A gentleness in how he helped her over difficult sections of tunnel, a careful attention to Kethmore's needs, an unconscious humming of those human lullabies when he thought she wasn't listening. This was not the savage warrior of galactic reputation. This was something far more complex, a being capable of extraordinary violence in service of protection, but who chose gentleness whenever possible. A man who carried pictures of his children into combat zones and risked his career to save an alien baby. The tunnels began to slope upward as they approached the mining complex. Marcus's scanner showed them drawing closer to their destination, but it also revealed something troubling. "Hegemony forces are converging on the area," he reported grimly. Looks like they're setting up a perimeter around the mining complex. They know we're heading there? Either that, or they're just being thorough. Hegemony doctrine calls for securing all strategic locations during planetary subjugation. Marcus stopped at a junction in the tunnels, studying his scanner carefully. There's another route, but it'll take us through flooded sections. Water's about chest deep for me, which means it'll be over your head. Zarathal looked down at Kethmore, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, blissfully unaware of their predicament. I can't swim with him. If I slip, if the current is too strong, then I'll carry you both. Marcus said it with such matter-of-fact certainty that she almost believed it was possible. I've done water insertions before. Just need to be careful and take it slow. You can't carry both of us through deep water. That's impossible. Marcus turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that reminded her why humans had become so feared across the galaxy. Not cruelty or bloodlust, but an absolute, unshakable determination. Zarathal, I made a promise to myself when I found your son. I promised I'd get him back to his mother safely. I keep my promises. The flooded section of tunnel was worse than Marcus had described. The water was ice-cold and moved with a current that spoke of underground streams and hidden depths. Emergency lighting strips along the walls cast eerie reflections on the surface, making it difficult to judge distances or obstacles. Marcus had improvised a carrying solution using his emergency pack and some climbing rope. Zarathal found herself strapped to his back like a piece of equipment, with Kethmore secured between them in a waterproof pouch. It was undignified and uncomfortable, but it worked. Just breathe steady, Marcus instructed as he waded into the water. If we hit a deep section, take a big breath and hold it. I'll get us through. The water rose quickly, reaching Marcus's chest within a few steps. Zarathal could feel his muscles working against the current, his breathing controlled and steady despite the additional weight he carried. When the water reached his neck, he tilted his head back and continued forward, using his hands to feel along the tunnel wall for guidance. Twice they hit sections where Marcus had to duck completely underwater, holding his breath while he navigated by touch alone. Each time, Zarathal found herself praying to whatever deities might be listening, clutching Kethmore's pouch and trying not to think about what would happen if Marcus lost his footing. But he didn't lose his footing. Step by careful step, he carried them through the flooded tunnel until they emerged, dripping and gasping, into a dry section beyond. Marcus set them down gently, immediately checking to ensure Kethmore was unharmed. The baby had slept through the entire terrifying journey, warm and dry in his improvised cocoon. How? Zarathal gasped, staring at Marcus in amazement. How did you do that? Marcus was checking his equipment, ensuring nothing vital had been lost to the water. Human military training includes underwater operations. Plus, I spent summers as a kid swimming in rivers and lakes. Water doesn't scare me much. He paused, looking at her with something that might have been embarrassment. Also, I really hate the idea of letting kids down. Does something to my brain chemistry, I think. They were close to the mining complex now, according to Marcus's scanner. The tunnels here were in better repair, with functioning lighting and air filtration systems. Apparently, the hegemony hadn't bothered to shut down the automated systems, confident that all the colonists were dead. There, Marcus said, pointing to a heavy door marked with industrial safety symbols. That leads to the main complex. Communication center should be on the 3rd level. He paused, checking his rifle one more time. Zarathal, I need you to understand something. Once I send that message, we're committed. My people will come, but it might take time. And the hegemony will know someone's alive down here. How long? She asked, adjusting her grip on Kethmore. Could be hours. Could be days. Depends on where the nearest Federation ship is positioned. Marcus met her eyes. I can't guarantee we'll make it until then. The hegemony doesn't take prisoners, and they really don't like humans interfering in their operations. Zarathal looked down at her son, then back at the human who had already saved their lives twice. What choice do we have?
None that I can see.
Marcus keyed the access code for the door, his jaw set with determination. But, if we're going down fighting.
That's the human way.
The mining complex was vast, carved from the living rock of Zirian 7's crust like some enormous artificial cavern. Automated equipment still hummed along conveyor belts, processing ore that would never be shipped off-world. Emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow, giving the place an ominous atmosphere. Marcus led them quickly through the facility, following signs toward the administrative levels where the communication equipment would be housed. Their footsteps echoed off the metal catwalks, and Kethmore began to fuss at the unfamiliar sounds and harsh lighting. Almost there, Marcus murmured, more to himself than to her. Just need to reach the comm center, send a coded burst transmission, and then find a defensible position to wait for pickup. But, as they climbed the stairs to the third level, Marcus's scanner began to show multiple contacts moving through the complex below them. Hegemony forces were already inside, systematically searching each level. They're fast, Marcus observed grimly.
Faster than I expected.
Must have detected our entry somehow. The communication center was a shrine to advanced technology, with quantum entanglement transmitters and subspace relay equipment that could reach across the galaxy in real time. Marcus moved to the primary console with practiced efficiency, his fingers dancing across controls that meant nothing to Zarathal. Federation Command, this is Sergeant Marcus Chen, service number 77942 Alpha.
Emergency extraction required, coordinates follows.
2 civilians, including infant, need immediate evacuation from Zirian 7.
Hegemony forces in pursuit. Will attempt to maintain position until pickup arrives.
The message was compressed into a data burst and fired into space at faster than light speeds. Somewhere, hopefully, Federation ships were listening for exactly this kind of transmission.
Done, Marcus said, beginning to shut down the equipment.
Now we just need to. The sound of plasma rifle fire erupted from the levels below them. Heavy boots pounded on metal stairs, accompanied by the harsh shouts of Crothery soldiers.
The Hegemony had found them. Marcus was already moving, snatching up additional ammunition and emergency supplies from the communication center's storage lockers.
There's a service tunnel that leads to the old waste processing section, he said rapidly. We can hold them off there for a while, maybe long enough for help to arrive. But, as they reached the service tunnel entrance, the sound of weapons fire grew closer. Too close. Through the facility's internal windows, Zarathal could see armored figures moving through the lower levels with deadly purpose. Marcus, she said quietly, clutching Kethmore closer to her chest.
There are too many of them.
The human soldier looked at the tactical situation with a professional's eye, calculating odds and angles of fire. When he turned back to her, his expression was calm but final.
Yeah. There are.
For a moment, they stared at each other in the red emergency lighting of the mining complex, alien mother and human warrior united by circumstance and desperation. Below them, the sound of the hunt grew closer. Above them, among the distant stars, help might or might not be coming. But Marcus Chen had made a promise. And he intended to keep it, no matter what the cost. The service tunnel was barely wide enough for Marcus's shoulders, forcing him to move sideways while maintaining his grip on the rifle.
Behind him, Zarathal followed with Kethmore pressed against her chest, the baby's small whimpers echoing softly in the confined space.
The sound of pursuit grew steadily louder, plasma fire scorching the metal walls where they had been moments before.
Marcus paused at a junction, consulting his scanner in the dim emergency lighting.
Waste processing is just ahead, he whispered. Lots of cover, multiple exit routes if we need them. His expression was grim but focused.
Zarathal, I need you to promise me something.
She looked at him with those large opalescent eyes that reflected fear but also trust.
What?
If something happens to me, if I go down, you take Kethmore and you run.
Don't try to help me, don't look back. Just run.
Marcus handed her a small device from his belt.
This is an emergency beacon. Federation ships will home in on it if they're in range. Activate it only when you're clear of the complex. Marcus, no. I won't leave you. Yes, you will.
His voice carried the absolute authority of a combat veteran.
Because that baby needs his mother alive more than he needs me. Promise me. Zarathal clutched the beacon, feeling its weight like a stone in her palm. I promise.
The waste processing section was a maze of pipes and filtration tanks, filled with the constant hum of automated systems. Water dripped from condensation lines, and the air tasted of recycled atmosphere and industrial chemicals. Marcus quickly identified several defensive positions, calculating fields of fire and fallback routes with the practiced eye of someone who had done this before. Here, he said, indicating a position behind a cluster of processing tanks. Good sight lines, solid cover, and 3 ways out if we need them. He began checking his weapons and ammunition, the ritual movements of a professional preparing for combat. Kethmore chose that moment to begin crying in earnest, his small voice echoing off the metal surfaces around them. The sound was heartbreaking in its vulnerability, a reminder of exactly what they were fighting to protect.
Shoo, little one, Zarathal whispered, rocking him gently. Please, you must be quiet.
But Kethmore was beyond comfort now. The stress of the past day, the unfamiliar surroundings, and his mother's fear had finally overwhelmed his infant capacity to cope. His cries grew louder, more desperate. Marcus looked at them with an expression of profound sadness. They'll track the sound, he said quietly.
Won't be able to hide our position much longer.
As if summoned by his words, the first Crothery soldiers appeared at the tunnel entrance.
Their thick, armored forms filled the opening, tusked faces scanning the processing chamber with predatory focus.
Marcus opened fire immediately, his rifle spitting precise bursts of energy that dropped 2 of them before they could react.
But more came behind them. Many more. The firefight that followed was brief and vicious.
Marcus moved between cover positions with fluid grace, his shots finding their targets with deadly accuracy. But, for every Crothery that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place.
Plasma bolts scorched the air around them, superheating metal and filling the chamber with the acrid stench of ozone.
Second wave coming through the maintenance shaft, Marcus called out, reloading with practiced speed.
We need to move.
He led them deeper into the processing section, using the maze of pipes and tanks to break line of sight with their pursuers.
But the hegemony forces were systematic in their approach, sealing off escape routes and gradually tightening their net.
There, Marcus pointed to a service ladder leading to an upper maintenance level.
We can get above them, maybe find another way out. Zarathal climbed first, Kethmore strapped securely to her chest in Marcus's improvised carrier.
The baby had stopped crying, perhaps sensing the mortal danger they faced, but his small body trembled with each explosion below. Marcus followed, laying down covering fire that kept the Crothery at bay for precious moments. The maintenance level was a narrow catwalk that ran the length of the processing chamber, lined with control panels and monitoring equipment. Through the metal grating below, they could see armored figures moving through the maze of machinery, hunting them with methodical precision. End of the line, Marcus said grimly, checking his scanner. The device showed hegemony forces moving to surround the entire section.
They've got us boxed in. Zarathal looked around desperately, searching for some escape route Marcus might have missed.
But there was nowhere to run. They were trapped on a narrow platform 40 meters above the chamber floor, with hostile forces closing in from every direction.
That's when Kethmore began to glow.
It started as a faint luminescence around his small form, barely visible in the dim lighting. But, as his distress grew, so did the strange radiance. His tiny tendrils moved in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic, and the air around him shimmered with energy that made Zarathal's skin tingle.
What's happening to him? Marcus asked, staring at the baby in amazement.
I don't know, Zarathal whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror.
This isn't normal Velnari development.
Children don't manifest psychic abilities this young, and never this powerfully. The glow intensified, and, suddenly, both adults could feel something in their minds. Not thoughts exactly, but pure emotion. Kethmore's fear and confusion washed over them, but underneath it was something else. Something that felt ancient and vast and utterly determined. The baby wanted to protect his mother.
The psychic pulse that erupted from Kethmore's small form was unlike anything in recorded Velnari history.
It spread outward through the facility like a wave of pure terror, striking every hegemony soldier simultaneously. Crothery warriors who had never known fear suddenly found themselves paralyzed by overwhelming dread. Officers who had commanded with absolute authority began screaming and fleeing in panic. On the maintenance catwalk, Marcus and Zarathal watched in stunned silence as their enemies abandoned their positions and fled the facility. The methodical hunt had become a chaotic rout in the space of seconds.
How?
Marcus breathed, staring at the baby who had somehow saved them all.
I think, Zarathal said slowly, her voice filled with wonder, Kethmore is what my people call a heart singer. A psychic prodigy born perhaps once in 1,000 generations. The old stories say they can touch the deepest emotions of any sentient being. Kethmore's glow was already beginning to fade, his small form relaxing as the immediate danger passed. He looked up at his mother with those large, innocent eyes, completely unaware of what he had just accomplished. Marcus's scanner was going crazy with contact alerts, but all the signals were moving away from their position. Whatever he did, it worked. Hegemony forces are in full retreat across the entire complex.
But, for how long?
Zarathal asked.
They'll regroup eventually. Send forces that aren't susceptible to psychic influence.
Then, we better hope the Federation gets here first.
Marcus activated his own emergency beacon, adding its signal to the one he had given Zarathal.
Double the transmission power, double the chance someone will hear us.
They made their way down from the maintenance level carefully, Marcus keeping watch for any hegemony stragglers. But, the facility seemed genuinely abandoned. Whatever Kethmore had done to the enemy soldiers, it had been thorough. In the main processing chamber, they found evidence of the panic that had gripped the hegemony forces. Weapons had been dropped, equipment abandoned, and blast marks on the walls showed where soldiers had fired wildly in their desperation to escape. It was as if a supernatural terror had swept through the facility.
Never seen anything like it, Marcus murmured, examining an abandoned Crothery rifle. These guys don't scare easily. They're bred for combat, conditioned to fight to the death. The heart singers of old were said to be able to drive entire armies from the field without raising a weapon, Zarathal explained, settling down to nurse Kethmore in a corner that offered good sightlines. But, the stories always said the ability came with a terrible price.
What kind of price?
The children rarely lived to see adulthood. The power burned them out from within, or made them targets for those who would exploit such abilities. She looked down at her son with a mixture of pride and fear. If Kethmore truly is a heart singer, his life will never be simple or safe. Marcus considered this soberly. Then, we'll just have to make sure he's protected. That he grows up somewhere he can learn to control what he can do. If you'll have me. Marcus checked his scanner again, noting that the hegemony retreat was holding steady. I figure a kid with abilities like that is going to need all the protection he can get. And, I'm pretty good at the protection business. Before Zarathal could respond, new contacts appeared on Marcus's scanner. But, these were different from the hegemony signals, cleaner, more organized, approaching from orbit rather than the planet's surface. Federation ships, Marcus said with relief. 3 cruisers in high orbit, deploying landing craft. Looks like someone heard our distress call after all. The rescue operation was swift and professional. Federation Marines secured the mining complex within an hour, their advanced equipment and training making short work of any remaining hegemony resistance. Medical teams attended to Zarathal and Kethmore, providing proper care and nutrition after their ordeal. But, it was the conversation with the Federation commander that proved most interesting. Sergeant Chen, Admiral Sarah Morrison said as they stood in the complex's now secure command center, "You realize you violated direct orders by engaging in ground operations?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, standing at attention despite his exhaustion. "No excuses, Admiral." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then looked over at Zarathal, who was feeding Kethmore nearby. "The Velnari government has formally requested asylum for their surviving populations. The Federation Council is inclined to grant it,
especially given what we've learned about hegemony atrocities on this world.
That's good news, ma'am. Indeed.
What's more interesting is the report from our science teams about what happened here.
They're detecting residual psychic energy signatures unlike anything in their databases.
Something that drove an entire hegemony battalion into full retreat without a single shot being fired.
Morrison's eyes fixed on Marcus. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Sergeant? Marcus glanced at Zarathal and Kethmore.
The baby was sleeping peacefully now, looking like any normal infant rather than a psychic prodigy capable of routing enemy armies.
Just lucky timing, I guess, Admiral.
Sometimes the bad guys get spooked and run.
Morrison smiled slightly. Lucky timing. Right. She pulled up a holographic display showing Federation territory and current refugee settlements.
The Velnari survivors are being relocated to several safe worlds within Federation space. Zarathal and her son have been specifically requested for resettlement on New Terra.
New Terra? Marcus asked, recognition dawning on his face. Yes. Your home world, Sergeant. Quite a coincidence.
Morrison's tone suggested she didn't believe in coincidences any more than Marcus did. The Federation Psychological Services have also recommended that young Kethmore receive specialized education to help him understand and control his unique abilities.
What kind of education? The kind that requires a dedicated guardian.
Someone with security clearance and combat experience who can ensure his safety while he learns.
Morrison looked directly at Marcus.
Someone who's already proven willing to risk everything to protect him. The implications hit Marcus slowly.
Admiral, are you offering me
reassignment to New Terra Garrison, with special duties involving refugee protection and psychic research assistance? Full family housing allotment, educational benefits for your own children, and a promotion to staff sergeant.
Morrison smiled.
Assuming, of course, that you're interested in the position. Marcus looked over at Zarathal and Kethmore again. The Velnari mother was watching him with hope and gratitude, while her son slept on, blissfully unaware of the forces already gathering around his unique gifts.
Yes, ma'am, Marcus said firmly. I'm very interested.
6 months later, on the peaceful world of New Terra, Zarathal watched from the window of their new home as Marcus played in the garden with 3 children. Emma and Jake, his own son and daughter, had adapted to their new alien friend with the easy acceptance of human children. They were teaching Kethmore to walk, the Velnari infant taking careful steps between their encouraging arms. The baby had grown remarkably in the months since Zirian 7. His psychic abilities remained dormant most of the time, but Dr. Elizabeth Crenshaw, the Federation's leading expert on alien psychology, believed that proper training could help him control and channel his gift constructively. He'll never have a normal childhood, Dr. Crenshaw had warned them. Children with abilities like his become targets for those who would exploit such power. But, with the right protection and education, he could become something remarkable. A bridge between species, perhaps, or a healer beyond anything we've ever imagined. Through the window, Zarathal watched as Marcus scooped up all 3 children, spinning them around until they shrieked with laughter. Kethmore's small tendrils waved happily in the air, and she could feel his joy through their empathic bond. Pure, innocent delight at being safe and loved and part of a family. The war with the hegemony continued across the galaxy, but, here on New Terra, in this small pocket of peace, a human soldier and an alien mother raised their children together. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but perhaps that made it all the more precious. Kethmore would face challenges as he grew older. His abilities would draw attention from those who saw them as weapons to be wielded or threats to be eliminated. But he would not face those challenges alone. He had a mother who loved him, a guardian who would die for him, and siblings who accepted him completely. Most importantly, he had learned the most valuable lesson humanity had to offer, that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In the garden, Marcus caught her watching and waved. Emma and Jake were showing Kethmore how to pet their dog, a gentle creature who had immediately accepted the alien child as part of the pack. The baby's laughter rang out like music, mixing with the sounds of human children at play. Zarathal smiled and waved back, feeling a contentment she had never expected to experience again. Her son was safe. More than safe, he was loved and cherished and growing up in a world where his unique gifts would be nurtured rather than feared.
The galaxy was still a dangerous place, full of species that chose conquest over cooperation, violence over understanding.
But, watching Marcus Chen play with 3 children who represented the future of 2 worlds, Zarathal found herself believing that perhaps, eventually, the forces of compassion would prove stronger than those of cruelty. After all, she had seen what one human soldier could accomplish when he decided to do what was right rather than what was ordered. If there were others like him among the stars, if humanity's greatest export truly was their stubborn refusal to abandon the innocent, then, perhaps the galaxy's future was brighter than anyone dared to imagine. In the garden, Kethmore took his first independent steps, walking from Emma to Jake and back again while Marcus cheered and applauded. His small face glowed with pride and happiness, and, for just a moment, Zarathal could swear she saw something else in his expression. Hope. Pure, undiluted hope for whatever tomorrow might bring. And that, she reflected, was perhaps the greatest gift any parent could give their child. Not safety from all harm, for that was impossible. Not power to overcome all obstacles, for that came with its own dangers. But hope. The absolute conviction that no matter how dark the galaxy might seem, there would always be people willing to stand against the darkness. People like Marcus Chen, who had emerged from the flames of war carrying her son in his arms and the promise of a better future in his heart. The stars wheeled overhead in New Terra's purple sky, indifferent as always to the small dramas playing out on the worlds below. But, here, in this garden, on this world, the future was being written one laugh, one stumbling step, one act of love at a time. And it was beautiful.